Geir Pedersen and the Emergency Relief Coordinator Thomas Fletcher for their briefings. We also heard the assessment by the chair of the Syrian Negotiations Committee, Mr. Badr Jamous, and the representative of the civil society, Ouad El-Khatib. We follow very closely the developing situation in the brotherly country of Syria, which has entered a new transitional period of its history after the major part of its territory came under the control of the alliance of armed groups. It is clear that predicting today the outcome and the political, socio-economic ramifications of developments in this country, of the major tectonic shifts there, is not something anyone can do. We are all hoping for the best. But I would like to underscore that the Russian Federation has always been on the side of the brotherly people of Syria. We have always extended and we will continue providing them with the needed support. It is the Syrian people, in all of its ethnic and religious diversity, has to decide the future of Syria, which currently is quite uncertain given the internal lack of stability, which is fraught with palpable threats to its sovereignty and statehood. The territorial integrity of this country is more vulnerable now than ever. There's a real risk of its becoming a number of cantons broken down by ethnic and religious characteristics. The Syrians today have made the utmost efforts to make sure there is an inclusive national dialogue without separating people into losers and winners. This is a very serious and difficult task, and the international community has to do utmost to help this along. There's an equally serious threat for the Syrians, which lies in the actions by Israel, who, using the artificial pretext of self-defense and protecting their security, essentially is deploying a full-scale operation to destroy the defense potential of the country. The Air Force of Israel, and they used to also conduct arbitrary airstrikes in the past, but as of the 8th of December, they have conducted more than 500 airstrikes. As a result, the Navy of Syria was destroyed, 90% of air defense and missile defense, and half of Syrian Air Force. Additionally, there are mass bombardments of government buildings and dozens of industrial and storage facilities in Damascus, Suwayda, Deraa, Homs, Tartus, Latakia, and Palmyra. Idlib, Atanf, and areas across the Euphrates are obviously outside of this equation. In the early hours of the 14th of December, the Air Force of Israel struck objects in the city of Qasyun and destroyed an electronic warfare station. There is also the land incursion by the Israeli forces in the occupied Syrian Golans, with this gross violation of the provisions of the disengagement agreement of 1974 and an open attempt on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a neighbor. According to our information, the Israeli forces are not just occupying the Syrian side of the separation line. They've moved much further. Israeli military equipment was seen almost 20 kilometers away from Damascus. The argument that the peacekeepers need to be protected sounds very cynical, given that the peacekeepers currently are essentially very deep behind Israeli lines. The capacity to effectively defend one's borders being attacked by Israel now is one of the basic factors of Syrian sovereignty. And we advocate that we call a spade and do not sweep under the carpet facts when they're inconvenient for West Jerusalem. If Israel wants to have good relations with neighbors, if Israel wants that, then they need to build this not from the position of force, but on an equal and mutually beneficial basis. Distinguished colleagues, one of the main tasks currently for us is safeguarding Syrian state institutions and making sure they function so as to provide everyday assistance to Syrians. It's important to make sure that the rules of basic law have primacy, that the civilians are protected, including the vulnerable categories, that there is civilian peace, national reconciliation, and to prevent vandalism, violence, and bloodshed. In this context, we note the statements made by the de facto authorities in Syria when they say that they intend to facilitate the work of government institutions, maintain law and security, suppress criminal acts, prevent extrajudicial justice. We trust that these approaches will be supported by all interested Syrian parties. We would like to emphasize separately that Syria was a territory where for centuries Muslims and Christians lived together. And Damascus is a residency of the Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch and all of the East, John X. He is the head of the Antioch Church, which has a sisterly interaction with the Russian Orthodox Church. And we hope that Syria will continue being the homeland for all of its citizens, regardless of their religion. We are convinced that the pathway towards normalization in Syria is in inclusive inter-Syrian dialogue, taking into account the interest of all religious and ethnic groups of the society when they're aimed at attaining national harmony, comprehensive settlement process, and doing this in line with the basic principles in Security Council Resolutions 2254. We support efforts made by Geir Pedersen to have a national de-escalation in organizing a political process and doing this with the mediation and support from the UN. We remain convinced that there is a need to consolidate approaches by main international players aimed at creating conditions conducive towards stabilization of the situation. It is our view that the Special Envoy should play a leading role in coordinating this work. And in this context, we welcome your initiative, Gary, to convene an international conference on Syria and call upon all interested parties to support implementing this idea. When there are such dramatic changes in Syria, we think it would be premature to come up with optimistic forecasts or talk seriously about the improved humanitarian situation of the Syrians. We would like to see Syria prosper as well, but so far Syrians are still encountering a deep humanitarian crisis. 90% of people live in poverty. 70% of people need urgent food assistance. Inflation spikes and currency devaluation because of recent events aggravated the socioeconomic situation of Syrians. In some parts of Syria, bread prices have grown up by 900% since 27th of November. The disruption of logistics supply lines and the closure of borders means that there are fewer resources and lack of the means of sustenance. There's an acute issue having to do with the displaced persons. There's a trend for the refugees to come back, but there's also an outflow of people from the country. Since the moment of the increase in hostilities, more than 1 million people had to leave their homes. Most of these people are women and children, and there are very difficult conditions now within the country and outside of it. We also should remember those who recently fled Lebanon into Syria because of Israeli bombings. They need to be helped, and at the very least, they need to have their security ensured. Madam President, we are concerned by the news according to which the humanitarian activity is seriously limited. Humanitarians are telling us about the security issues, power cuts, and instances of looting. In Damascus, for example, humanitarian assistance warehouses have been looted. At the same time, we support the intent of humanitarian UN agency to continue being on the ground and continue providing assistance. The humanitarian crisis in Syria, which reached a catastrophic level, is something that demands urgent and coordinated action on the behalf of the entire international community. Unfortunately, the humanitarian appeal on Syria is underfunded. It has only received 1/3 of the funding, 32%. In this regard, we would like to address the so-called traditional donors and ask them a question. Are you going to be guided by the principles of humanity and impartiality when it comes to the Syrian humanitarian file? Or will you, as before, continue the practice of suffocating the Syrian people through sanctions? Sanctions need to be lifted because they, as we've always said, impact the everyday people. For our part, we will continue extending the assistance to the brotherly people of Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement.